The candle smoke curled like a question mark in the stillness of the pyramid chamber, and Quentyn watched it as if it might arrange itself into letters he could read. It smelled of cedar and something stronger, a resin the Myrinese priests burned to make their gods lean closer. The window was open to the pale of dawn. High up here the wind came clean, stripped of the fish stink of the river and the city's rot. It brought only the rustle of palm fronds, the dry rasp of a desert that lay beyond walls and water, the restless sighing of a place that had never heard of Dorne and would never care. He had never been a man for omens. He had been taught plainsong and ledgers, the dry histories of cousins and cousins of cousins who married where it suited, and kept the desert from killing them by knowing when to bend and when to wait. He had been taught the small courtesies, the long courtesies, the way to hold his tongue until it was needed. He was not his uncle. He had no gift for poison nor poetry. He had come alone when he should have come with fleets, with a name that could set harbors on fire. He had come and failed. Except he had not failed, not finally, not fatally. The dragon door had stayed shut. The key that had been promised was smoke and lie. The wind blown had been dust on the horizon the day he turned back from the pit, and the tattered prince had grinned the way a jackal grins when a trap closes on a sheep's ankle far from any herd. He had felt small then, smaller than when he was a boy and Arianne laughed at him for speaking an oath in his father's cups. He had felt like a mistake someone polite had chosen to ignore. He had gone to her chambers with the parchment that smelled of oil and years, the seal of the trident broken and mended twice, the jagged scrape where his father had first read the promise by lamplight in Sunspear. He had held it over the candle flame and whispered the names like a prayer. Viserys, Willem Darry, Elia, and she had taken it from him without looking at the words, as if she had already read them in his face. "I married for peace once," she said. "It fed my city blood. Another man's promise will not make me a queen." There was no anger in it, no cruelty. Her hair was silver under the lamplight and her eyes were the clear dark of deep water where moonlight waits. He had felt a foolish thing swell up in his throat, a child's plea. He swallowed it like a stone. He told her of Dorne's water gardens, of oranges scented with sun, of girls learning to swim before they learned to bow, of a prince who had waited too long and outwaited even patience. He told her the hard thing too, the only thing that might matter. "My father cannot bring you ships," he said. "He cannot put the reach to sword or lift the north for love you have never had. He can give you a harbor that will not betray you. He can give you time. Time is the coin I cannot spare," she said, and something moved in her eyes, a hunger like a long drought coming to end. "Do you have dragons, Quentyn Martell?" No, he had to look down when he said it. "But I have vows." She studied him for a silence that went too long. She had the habit of a woman who remembered when silence meant survival. At last she said, "Bring me a thing that is yours to give, not your father's." He had gone away and sat with Jairus and Archibald in a room with walls the color of old bone and a jug of wine that tasted of the river's mud. They said the things men say to keep each other from breaking. Jairus made jests. Archibald cracked his knuckles and said he would take the city on his back and walk it to the sea if she asked. Quentyn had watched the candle smoke then too, or something like it, his mind making a small circle and walking it over and over until the stones had worn smooth. "Bring me a thing that is yours to give." He had nothing. He had his name, which was his father's. He had the parchment, which was a dead king's. He had his face, which was sun-browned and plain and made women look for the man behind him who must be the one sent for their favor. He had himself. He remembered some book where a maester had told a dull boy that oaths were only words until a life was laid down to make them iron. He had nothing to lay down but that life. He thought of the dragons again and felt the heat of them in a room he had never stood in the darkness under Meereen, the close air and the reek of scorched bone. He saw himself alight like a torch and heard Arianne laughing at his oath. Archibald snored. Jairus slept with his arm over his eyes as if day might creep up on him unawares. Quentyn rose and went back to the balcony where he had left the night. The city moved like an animal down there, breathing thick, breathing slow. Somewhere a woman laughed. Somewhere a child cried and was hushed. Somewhere a harp that had never seen Dorne plucked out notes that could have been water drops. He thought of Sunspear and the long stair that wrapped the Tower of the Sun. He thought of standing halfway up, looking over the Shadow City where the alleys made their own laws. He whispered into the warm wind, "My lady, give me a chance. Not for Dorne, for me." He did not know that she was awake too, walking barefoot across rushes that had been changed an hour before because she could find sleep only in small ways now, in gestures that told her a thing like order existed. She watched the window where she had left the night open. The air that came through was honest. In the court below, palms lifted their hands to the moon. She had dreamed of a house with a red door again, though the lemon tree had not been there this time. She had woken with the taste of salt on her mouth and could not tell whether it was sea or tears. "Bring me a thing that is yours." She had said it to punish him a little for not being his uncle, for not walking in with a jest and a promise of swords that bit like kisses. She had said it because all her life men had come with other men's gifts for her, and she was a woman made of the things she had refused. She had said it because she had no right to a promise a dead boy had written to a dying exile, and because she had nothing left to trade but herself and had not yet learned how not to loathe the barter. In the morning she sent for him again, and they spoke with no parchment on the table. Barristan stood behind her shoulder like a white tree. Missandei poured watered wine and read the silences as if each were a line of a text. Quentyn had cut himself shaving, and the Nick refused to stop weeping. He smelled of soap he had brought across half a world because the clean of it made him remember being a boy who did not understand what he wanted yet. "Will you take me to Dorne?" she asked. The question made him blink. "If you command it."
"No."
"If I ask." "I will take you," he said, and looked toward the open archway where the pale sky lay like a promise. "I will take you as my wife if you will have me." Barristan shifted. The sound of his armor, old steel, oiled leather, was a comfort in a room where words could burn everything that lived. Missandei's face did not change, but one small finger traced a slow circle on the jug's handle, as if there were a game with only one piece and she had to keep it moving. "My city bleeds around me," Daenerys said. "I bound my life to it and learned that a queen's life is only a thing that ties 1,000 others together. If I leave, it will be for a reason that is not mine alone. If I wed you, it will be for more than a departed prince's paper. What does Dorne offer me?" He swallowed. "A place to stand," he said. "A place you can stand long enough to draw breath and not have your breath counted for you. Place that remembers Elia." His voice roughened when he said that name. He did not will it. "A place that will not hand you to your enemies to buy a morning's peace. Dorne will be your harbor, my lady. It is not a sword, but even swords rust if they cannot be set down someplace safe. Let us put you ashore." She had not expected him to speak Elia's name. When he did, the room shifted. Barristan Selmy made a sound that could have been a breath pulled against a stitch. The old knight's jaw worked. He was suddenly a young man with a white cloak too large for him and a song so heavy in his heart it pulled him to his knees. Daenerys thought of the stories that belonged to her blood, the ones that had been told to her by men who had loved a prince who played a harp and forgot the weight of crowns. She thought of a lilac-scented lady with a voice like a summer afternoon who had died like a rabbit beneath men who wore lions on their chests. She thought of the way grief made a country out of a room. She thought of doors and harbors and breaths that were not counted. "You ask for me," she said, "and not dragons." "I ask for you," Quentyn said. It was not gallant, not bold, not the thing that would have made a hall of men roar their cups. But it was an answer no counsel could write for him, and it was his. It was not clever, and she was sick to death of clever men. "Then ask properly," she said, and he blinked again, startled into himself. He dropped to one knee on rush-strewn stone that pricked his skin through good Dornish cloth. He looked up into the light behind her as if the sun had come into the room and he had been very long without it. "Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen," he said. "Will you wed me and let me bring you home?" Missandei's circle stopped. Barristan bowed his head so that the sunfall through the arch turned a rim of silver on his hair. In the courtyard a bird cried 3 times. When Daenerys answered, Her voice was not soft. "Yes," she said. "If we are to keep our word to a dead boy, we will make a living thing of it." They were wed in a hall that had never seen such a marriage. It was a thing made quick by necessity and careful by those who loved ceremony. A red priest muttered a blessing for fire. A yellow priest sang a hymn for the sun. A wine merchant's widow who had lost 2 sons and 3 husbands tied a ribbon about their wrists because someone had to tie a ribbon and she had the hands to do it. Barristan spoke for old vows. Missandei spoke for new ones, words of the long summer tongues that made the air hum. Grey worms stood at the far wall with the stillness of a blade in a sheath and watched, not understanding the shape of this battle but knowing a battle it was for all that. They ate dates and drank watered wine, and Daenerys laughed once when Archibald Ironwood, who had the look of a siege tower grown unexpectedly tender, tried to dance like a man made of jointed sticks. Jaehaerys toasted them 7 ways. Quentyn sat beside her and was careful, and then, after a while, he was not careful. He learned the weight of her hand in his. He learned the sound of her breath when something amused her. He learned that she hated figs only when they were too ripe. He learned that her laughter was a bird that would come to him if he was very still and did not try to trap it. They left Meereen with a smallness that made the leaving possible. 30 ships with orange sails and narrow hulls that loved the shallows and could outrun men who did not understand how a desert makes sailors. They came down the Skahazaden at dawn, the city's teeth behind them, the river's brown mouth ahead, and the gulf beyond like a coin flipped into the sun. The war that had wrapped Meereen like a net could not draw them back because nothing in that war believed in small boats and quiet vows. It wanted banners and thunders. It did not know how to follow a woman who had learned to make a world out of nothing, a boy who carried home in his chest like a slow-burning coal. Barristan came with them because he could not stay. He left behind a stack of letters and a man who had never wanted to rule a city and who would do it because the honor that held him upright was a thing made of bones. He kissed Missandei's forehead like a father who has remembered there is still a child to protect. She did not cry where he could see. As they passed the black-beaked warships that watched the mouth of the river, a wind came up that smelled of salt and lemons and something sharper, as if the sea had bitten into a metal mask and drawn blood. Daenerys stood on the foredeck and felt the world begin to move in a way that made sense again. The water had a speech she knew from before memory. It spoke of what is larger than cities and smaller than promises. It spoke of roads without dust and doors that opened whether or not anyone knocked. At Volantis they lay to, because ships must eat and men must too, and because the Triarchs were a creature even a dragon queen had best look upon and smile for a moment before she turned away. The black wall rose like an old thing that had made a bargain and kept it longer than a people can believe. The elephants were gaudy and the tigers were dangerous, and both thought themselves wiser than the other. A red priest with eyes like coals and breath that steamed in the heat took one look at Daenerys and fell to his knees in the filth of the fish market and called her light-made flesh. She helped him to his feet and told him to bring water for the children crying while their mothers waited for the slave tally to be finished. Quentyn watched the way the city leaned toward her and then leaned away, unable to commit to its own wonder. He had never seen a place so full of its own hunger. He saw himself reflected in it, a man who had wanted something unnamed and had gone to find it where men who do not swim drown quick. He bought oranges that tasted of dust and a little boat carved of bone with 3 heads at its prow that were meant to be dragons and looked like dogs. He tucked it into his pocket like a charm he would not admit he believed in. At night Daenerys dreamed of heat that did not wound, and of a tower made of sunlight, and of girls with brown shoulders diving from stone stairs into a pool where shade lived. She woke with the taste of an orange on her tongue, though she had not eaten one since the one in Meereen that had been too sweet. She woke with her hand on the place where Quentyn's shoulder lay under linen. She listened to his breath. She lay still and thought of all the rooms in the world where other women lay awake listening to other men breathe and wondered if the sum of those breaths made a wind somewhere or a tide, a thing that moved ships without sails. They made the Lys Passage with a weather that favored them, as if some god had remembered a debt owed to a long-dead princess. They saw turtles the size of oxen and gulls that followed them for 3 days and then forgot why. Archibald taught a boy from Meereen to tie a knot used by Dornish fishermen. The boy taught Archibald how to whistle whole songs with his teeth. Jairus wrote a poem about the way the wake braided itself and then unbraided and recited it to Missandei, who corrected his rhymes gently and made them better. Barristan sharpened his sword with care, not because he expected to need it that day, but because he always had. Quentyn learned the sea in a way men from the desert must, or they vomit themselves inside out. He learned which timbers creaked in friendly ways and which were warning, which ropes he could trust if he had only his weight and no prayer. He learned his wife a little. He did not make it a siege. He did not advance his banners, not because he was timid, but because he was careful with the only thing he had ever wanted that had wanted him. He found her on the deck at night and told her stories of a place where wind came off stone and smelled of heat. She told him stories of a place where wind had names and she had nothing the wind wanted to take. When he kissed her, the taste of salt on her mouth was both sea and tears, and he did not ask which. They came into sight of the dragon's tail of Westeros at dusk on a day when the clouds had piled up like bright armor to the west and the sun had hammered them thin. The captain of Quentyn's flagship, a lean man from Planky Town with hands like rope scars, leaned forward, issuing a string of words that were half prayer and half arithmetic. The men murmured and then laughed and then fell quiet all at once. Daenerys went to the prow because she could not wait to meet the shape of the land like another person. The desert does not present itself. It is simply there, and you may die in it if you forget that it does not notice you. But this coast met her the way a mother meets a child who has outlived the fever. She had seen maps. She had heard Barristan's voice go soft when he spoke of Dornish light and color, of the way everything was warmed through with oranges and old stones and water that meant something. But maps are lies as gentle as nurses. Land is land. It rose from the sea, first as smell and then as line and then as fact. The smell of it was a fist of sage and dust and something like hot coin, the metal of the sun. The line of it was low and then broke into spears of rock like a crown thrown down in anger. The fact of it was the gasp that went through the men like the wind that comes in a room where someone has lifted a veil. Quentyn's hands were fist and open at once on the rail. He had not seen home in years, and the word home is a thing that grows teeth when you are far from it. He did not speak. He had not known until this hour how much he had feared he would never see the color of that sand again, or the way the light sat on it as if it owned not only the day but something under it. He did not know whether to kneel. He did not know whether to laugh. He looked at his wife and saw his country look back out of a stranger's eyes and had to look away before he bowed to both. They ran the shoals as only men lie bred to shallow seas can do, with poles and curses and a reading of the water like scripture. They came into the shelter of the plank-built town that sprawled up out of the marsh like an animal that had decided to pretend to be a city and saw themselves seen. The first cries went up like birds startled into flight. Then came a rush of people along the piers, arms waving, a sound that was joy and fear married and not yet learned how to live together. Men cried out the Martell words. Someone shouted for water for the queen, a thing that had not yet been confirmed and was already true. Daenerys stepped ashore on planks that had been worn smooth by barefoot boys and women carrying baskets of fish and men who had the sea in their spines. She had come barefoot herself, because the deck's pitch had taught her its slyness, and because she wanted the first thing that touched Westeros to be the soles of her feet and not leather that could be any leather anywhere. The wood was hot from all day's sun and sticky with old tar. Felt like decision. A man with a face seemed like old rope fell to his knees when she passed and kissed the planks where her foot had been. She stopped because she had learned to stop when something true happened, because the world taught you how to hurry but not how to honor. She put her hand on his head and felt the smallness of the place where his skull had not knit right when he was a baby. He looked up and his eyes were the color of the sea when a storm wants your boat. "My queen," he said, trying the words as if they were a fruit he had never bought before, and smiled when he found they were sweet. They did not tarry long in Planky Town. The masts moved like a stand of forest when the wind remembers to be a hunter again. A man in a scorpion boat went ahead to carry news like fire. The mart of sailcloth and saltfish and women shouting prices became a dream as they made their way along a coast Quentyn knew the way men know. Scars. He pointed to a spit of rock that looked like a spear and said, "That's nothing to anyone but men from here. He told her the names that belonged to the places and the names that only came when men got drunk and wanted to pretend they lived twice. By afternoon they had reached the harbor that had waited for them since someone had first drawn its shape with a stick while a child watched and learned what lines can cause. Sunspear rose dark and light at once, its towers the color of baked bread and old bones. The spears of stone that gave it its name stabbing at a sky that looked as if it had been put there to refuse them and then relented. The Shadow City wrapped those towers like a shawl old women made in a summer when there had been water enough. Hoda had heard the boats before he saw them. He heard the difference between a hull that has learned these waters and one that still mistrusts them. His axe was light in his hands. He stood at Prince Doran's shoulder in a room where Shade had been invited with dignity and was treated like a guest of rank. The prince's chair had been placed so that wind could find him and the sound of water could make the room a little wider than Pain wanted it to be. Planky Town sent a runner, the prince said. Orange sails, the red. His hand, thin now, and more mottled than it had been the winter before, moved on the head of his cane. He had a way of making any small movement meaningful, as if the years had taught him that no motion should be wasted. Ario, my prince. The stairs. Ario inclined his head. The stairs were not a place to hurry. When he came out into the light, it fell on his skin like another man's hand, heavier than the sun on the deck of any ship, heavier even than the sun of Norvos in a summer when the river had gone down and men fought for the shade of a single tree. He led the way, his feet remembering the measure of the steps. Behind him he heard the flutter of silk and the small rush of a woman's breath who had been waiting too long to see whether a letter would become a face. Ariane came like summer. She had the color of the sun in her and the knowledge of it, and she walked with her head the way a dancer does when she hears a rhythm no one else has yet. She had dragged the pins from her hair and let it fall because she did not intend to pretend she was not herself today for any counsel. She realized after she had taken 3 steps onto the stair that she was breathing as if she had been running and made herself slow. She told herself that she was not a girl waiting at the top of a tower to see if a boy would appear from boats, and then gave up lying to herself because there was no one watching but Ario, who had watched her learn to lie and not gotten angry with her about it. She saw the first orange sail and put her knuckles between her teeth and bit down so she would not cry out. She had been told 10,000 things about this day. She had told 10,000 of them to herself. None of those had included the way the sun would hit the water and throw it back at the walls, setting Sunspear to gleaming as if it had the sea inside it. None had included the way a white head on a foredeck could catch the light and hold it. None had included the way she would look at her brother and see a man who had left boyhood behind without ever being handsome or quick, and who had done a thing that would be told around this stair until the stone wore thin. The crowd below had begun to gather so quickly it was as if the city had turned itself inside out. Women in white with scarves the color of saffron. Boys who had stolen their father's old spears and brought them to be seen with. Girls with their hair plaited into crowns of thorns and dates. Old men with hands that trembled when they tried to lift them and then did not tremble at all when they held them steady because this mattered. The cry that went up when the small boat with the red banner on its prow cut through the harbor was not a word. It was something you might make if someone took a band about your chest and pulled until you could not find breath and then let it go all of a sudden. Daenerys looked up at the tower that must be the Tower of the Sun. They had told her its name as if it were always capitalized, a thing that did not know how to be small, and saw a dark-haired woman in a gown that had been chosen without counsel by someone who knew exactly how much of her body to instruct and how much to let do what it pleased. She saw an old man seated where a king might sit in a place that did not care for kings, with a face that had been carved by patience and by pain and by both at once. She saw a soldier beside him whose beard had more gray than black and whose eyes had the same. The first step onto stone was the first step into a story she had not been able to read in Meereen, because the letters there were knives and the punctuation was blood. She felt the city take her weight. She felt Quentyn's hand at her back, not pushing, only there, a heat she believed she might learn to trust. Doran Martell rose on the 3rd try. The effort cost him breath and pride, and he did not let either matter. He held out his hand to her, and she took it, and her hand was cooler than he expected and smaller, and the bones were fine the way Elias had been. He did not let the memory of his sister's hand cross his face. He had taught his face to be a wall, and it had become one. But there were moments when even walls must know what they house. He bowed, not deeply because his body would not do it, and because courtesy given by a prince to a queen should be measured as to a peer, not profuse as to a god. "Daenerys of House Targaryen," he said. "Princess Queen, you are welcome in Sunspear. You are welcome in Dorne." "Prince Doran," she said, and her voice had a music to it that had not come from any court he knew. She had learned to speak in rooms where men who owned ships argued with men who owned whips, and the sound of it had taught her a way to carry weight that did not crack. "Your son brought me as the sea brings gifts, without wrapping, and the gift is what it is." The old man's mouth softened. He looked past her to Quentyn, who stood with his hands at his sides as if he might not know what to do with them now that they were not gripping a rail or a sword. Doran's eyes did not shine. Whether they had been meant to or not in the first place, time had made them a kind of stone that could hold warmth and not reflect it. "You have done what was asked of you," he said. "I did not tame dragons," Quentyn said low. "I did not bring an army. I brought her." "That will be enough," Doran said. He did not add for now. He had the discipline to let the words be what they could survive as. He put his hand on his son's shoulder, and for a breath they were a family that had eaten together every day since a boy was born, and a father had been the kind of strong that does not make rooms go quiet. Then the moment broke like a wave on a stone and left wetness and a salt taste and nothing you could carry away. "Come," he said. "My niece is waiting to look at you, Daenerys Targaryen." The way a woman looks at her future and decides how much of it she must make herself. Arianne came down the steps like the road has come to meet you when you have been walking too long. She stopped a measured distance away and sank in a curtsy that would have made a court of the least of the Shadow City's alleys. She rose without letting her hair catch on the stone. She had learned its weight as she had learned her own. Her eyes were a color she had bought from the sun with her body. Her smile was a thing the sun had not sold her. "Welcome, cousin," she said. "You have found yourself a hot bed." Daenerys smiled back, shameless and glad to be given a jest that did not have knives tucked into it. "I have slept on stone," she said. "Hot will be a kindness." They kissed each other's cheeks lightly, as women do who will one day tell each other truths so sharp that skin will not suffice to keep blood in. For now it was easy. For now it was the opposite of Meereen. That was a grace and a trap, and Daenerys knew it and stepped into it anyway because all grace is a trap if you misuse it, and perhaps she had learned enough not to. The hall they brought her to was cool and smelled of water making itself through stone. The walls had mosaics of ships and lances and hands with oranges in them. A little boy was there with his arm in a sling, his hair like a Martell's but fairer, his mouth stubborn. Beside him stood a girl with honey hair and a scar that had taken a piece of her ear and left a map of pink on her face. She looked at Daenerys and did not curtsy, not because she had not been taught but because she was testing a thing, and perhaps because pain had made rules into poor dresses that tore when you tried to move in them. "This is Myrcella Baratheon," Doran said, and the room adjusted itself to fit the dangerous truth of that name. "And this is my son Trystane." Daenerys went to the girl first. She did not reach for her face because you must let a child decide how much of her hurt is public. She took her hand instead, and found it warm and narrow and sweaty with the effort of being brave. "Do people stare?" she asked, keeping her voice as calm as the pool in the water gardens, where she had not yet put her feet and which she could see with the sight of someone who had dreamed a tower and wound up under it. "All the time," Myrcella said. She did not sound ashamed. She sounded like a person reporting the flow of a river she was not responsible for. "They whisper too. Let them." Daenerys lifted the girl's hand and kissed the palm. "When you are a queen, whispering is what you will hear most. It is the way cowards pray." Myrcella looked at her steadier. She had been taught that queens were soft except when they were cruel. She had known one queen, and it had not gone well for anyone in rooms near her. This woman had eyes like night water and something like a sword in her voice. Myrcella liked her at once, and knew better than to show it. Trystane bowed properly, then spoiled it by smiling, which showed him to be young. "Did you come on dragons?" he asked. It was the question of a boy and not a foolish one. "On ships," Daenerys said, "which are dragons for water. My dragons are far away. I will call them, and they will come when they are ready." He accepted it as boys accept that cats live by laws men cannot codify. He stared at her hair until his father touched his sleeve. Arianne pinched him lightly and did not stop him from smiling again because the room needed it. Wine was poured and bread broken and something like peace attempted. Doran asked after the sea and Daenerys asked after the water gardens, and they both spoke as if this were a conversation that would last for years and had only just begun. As if there were no swords in kitchens and no ravens blackening the sky. Areo stood and watched, and the axe in his hands was very light. He could hear the whisper at the back of the room that had started when the girl entered. "Myrcella, Queen, Ir, Darkstar." He could hear the whisper that had started the moment the first orange sail was sighted. "Daenerys, Targaryen, fire." He could not hear the third whisper yet, the one that was sharpening itself in rooms far away where men who had not earned their meat were planning to feed on what other men had killed. He could not hear the word Aegon, not yet, because the word had not been spoken here. It would arrive soon enough, flying on ink-stained feathers that carried plague and news and did not stop to eat. Barristan Selmy stood in a corner of a hall that smelled of water and oranges and found himself young in a way that hurt. He had crossed this desert once in another life, a squire who wanted a thing that could not be put into words, chasing a prince who made songs sound like swords. He had seen Elia at a distance, a flash of color at a window, a laugh that stroked a room's back and made it purr. And he had sworn himself to a king and a queen and then had broken under more oaths than any man should be made to carry. Now he stood and watched a silver-haired woman meet a dark-eyed prince with a chair that had been made to be patient. And he thought as he had not allowed himself to in years, perhaps. He saw Quentyn hold himself in check and felt a sympathy that surprised him for its roughness. It is no easy thing to be a man who has done a thing that matters and not know how to measure it. He saw Arianne's gaze go to her brother and back to the queen, and he saw the math of a woman who knows how to reckon value by measures not written in any book. When they brought Daenerys to her chamber at last, it opened on a balcony that held a wind that had been trained to curl around the tower in a way that cooled a body without letting it forget its own heat. The floor had been tiled in a pattern that made the eye walk it without getting lost. A bowl on a low table held oranges of 4 kinds, and lemons so bright they looked like lit candles, and dates that sweated sugar. A pitcher beneath a wet cloth kept water cool as courtesy. She sent the attendants away with thanks she did not waste. When she and Quentyn were alone, the room became smaller, as rooms do when the shape of them becomes the shape of a breath. She went to the balcony and put her hands out on the stone and felt heat and oldness, the two things that make a place a place. The street far below had quieted, but the quiet was full of people whose mouths had been telling each other something all day and could not stop just because the sun had decided to lie down for a while. The sea beyond the black line of the wall had not quieted. It was a body, and bodies do what they will in the dark. Quentyn came to stand beside her. He did not touch her at once. He waited long enough to let the choice matter. When her hand sought his, it found his fingers warm and square, as if they had been made for useful work and had learned a different sort of use lately. They stood like that, and the night came up around them like a tide. "You have given me a place to stand," she said. "You have given me a thing to stand for," he said. She turned toward him then. The wind lifted a strand of her hair and laid it against his cheek like the hand of a woman generous enough to bless a man who might not deserve it yet. He kissed her easily, because the long voyage had taught them how not to make haste an enemy. They woke to the sound of children. The water gardens were a boat's ride away along a channel so old it had grown weeds of law and custom. Daenerys watched the oarsmen pull, long and even strokes, the rhythm a man could live inside and not go mad, and felt the old ache, the one that had been her only companion when she had been very small and had not known it had a name. She had never run in a pool with other children, had never learned to swim in a sea that wanted you but not too much. She had learned to watch men weigh her as they would weigh fruit, and to keep her seed unbruised if she could. She could see the gardens not as pictures in Barristan's careful words, but as light on water and laughter turning stone into air. Nude children splashed everywhere, brown limbs and bright screams. Some with hair like the shadow of a palm, and some with hair like wheat, and some with hair like baked mud. Girls pushed boys under, and boys pretended to drown and were disappointed when no one saved them. The men and women who watched smiled and did not smile, because to watch children at play is to be reminded of what is not play and of when. A girl with a scar like a white lizard on her shoulder pulled herself out of a pool with the confidence of a queen. Daenerys watched her walk, a child and a queen in the same body, and smiled in a way that hurt her. Doran sat in a wheeled chair on a shaded terrace, his feet wrapped because the sun made his gout a thing that liked to be asked for permission. Arianne lounged like a cat where she could see her father and he could see her. Areo stood where men who might do something should stand and tried to make a stillness that would be large enough for the whole place. Quentyn's face had lost the last of its boat pallor and taken its color back. He looked 10 years older and 10 years younger both. "My sister loved this place," Doran said when Daenerys had come to stand beside him. She would bring her children and climb those steps with them, and when she was tired she would sit there and not tell anyone because she did not want to borrow the tired of others. She would put her feet in the water and whisper to them as if water carried understanding as well as cool. Daenerys did not imagine the ghosts. She had lived too long in rooms where ghosts were instructed to sit at table and be quiet because propriety allowed no other place for them. She watched a girl teach a younger boy to float and not be afraid. She watched water slip along stone as if it were reading the lines time had written for it. She slid her sandals off with her toes and went down the steps and put her feet into a pool where the shadow of a lemon tree lay. The shock stole her breath and then gave it back cleaner, as if it had been washed through a cloth. Arianne joined her, skirts rucked up just enough to be practical and no more, because even the water gardens were a stage if you were a woman and had learned your cues. They stood with their feet in water like two girls who might learn to be friends and might not. "You have done what men only threaten to do," Arianne said after a time. "You have turned our rooms into a war without raising your voice." "I will raise it if I must," Daenerys said, and the sun made coins on the water. "But I am tired of shouting." "Good. Shouting is only useful if men have not yet learned to listen to your silence. Here they will have to. My father is quiet as a stone and loud as an avalanche. Men do not hear him because they do not watch long enough for falling snow. They will hear you sooner. They will love you faster. They will hate you more. You speak as if you admire hate. I speak as if I have worn it like a dress that does not fit and had to learn to walk all the same. Hate is heavy and shows stains. Love is lighter and shows stains also. Neither is a thing a woman can avoid. Not if she means to do anything." "Do you mean to do something?" Daenerys asked, not unkindly. Arianne's smile sharpened. "I mean to live. That is something. And I mean to see which of the wars that arrive in Sunspear I can turn on each other so that the sand drinks their blood before it drinks ours." They did not turn at the sound of footsteps behind them. It was a man who had learned how to walk without threatening the calm in a room. Barristan bowed enough to be a courtesy to two women and not an announcement. "A raven from the west," he said. Doran's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. He had known this hour would come. He had weighed its weight, stroked it, decided where in his day he could carry it without breaking. It had come earlier than he had hoped and later than he had feared, which was to say at the only hour fate permits. "Let us have it," he said, and Areo brought the letter on a tray the way a servant might bring fruit, the way death might bring a message when it has dressed in livery to be polite. The seal had been broken and mended thrice already by other hands that had needed to be sure of what they were handling. It bore a device none of them had seen from that direction in many years, a fire and a three-headed promise. Barristan held the parchment and did not hold his breath. Arianne leaned so that she could see. If the words wanted to lift themselves and fly into her eyes. Daenerys did not move at all, as if the letter were a snake and she had learned not to startle until she knew which way it would strike. "My lords," Barristan read, and then frowned and smiled at once, a thing only age allows. "My lady, my queen, this is either a careful letter or an impertinent one." "Read," Doran said. "In the Stormlands," Barristan read. A boy has come ashore with a Sellsword company old enough to know better than to do this, and he calls himself Aegon, son of Rhaegar and Elia, king by right. The old knight looked up then and said, softly, almost to himself, Rhaegar. He swallowed it like a man who has bitten a pepper by mistake and will not let tears fall for it. Areo felt the room change shape. Arianne's hand tightened on Daenerys' sleeve until she could feel the heat of it through silk. Quentyn stood very still and looked at the water at his feet and saw the way it moved around his ankles and tried to decide if he was drowning and decided he was not yet. Doran leaned back the length of a breath and then came forward again, because the body must do something while the mind considers whether the world is real or a suggestion. There is more, Barristan said. He has taken a seat. Not a large one, but one men will die for. He has taken it with discipline. They say he fights like a prince who had a father who taught him which end of a sword to hold. They say he is beautiful enough to be dangerous and has the sense to be worse than that. Daenerys took the letter then because she must look at the shape of the words, not just their sound. The script was neat. The ink had been expensive. The hand that had formed the letters had not shook. She felt in the stroke something of a schooling she had never had. Men who were beloved by old women, a room with a window and a desk and a boy bent over it while someone took a stick to his knuckles when he slipped. Aegon. It is a name that tries men. It is a name that makes kings taller and children die. My brother's son is dead, she said. Not to be cruel, but because truth clears the ground for whatever must be built upon it. Rhaegar's boy died in the sack. His sister too. This is a lie, or an orphan who learned to carry a story that belonged to no one and found it fit his shoulders. My sister's son died, Doran said. I was not there to keep his heart in his body. I do not know what it means to hear that a boy with his name and his claim has come out of the sea like a fish you had not known swam so close to shore. I know this. Whether this is a ghost or a pretender, he brings a war. We are now a house with 2 Targaryens in our rooms. Quentyn's mouth had gone dry so fast it was as if he had eaten a spoon of salt. Aegon. The word found the place where his doubt had been small and fed it. He looked at Daenerys and saw no fear in her face, only a rage that had been leashed so long it had learned to lie down like a hound beside a chair. He loved her then more than he had loved her when she had said yes, because he had wanted to love someone who could look at a storm and weigh it, not someone who would throw herself into it and call drowning an achievement. Then we make our harbor into a shipyard, Daenerys said. We have a place to stand. Now we must become a thing that moves. Arianne smiled like a woman who knows a dance is about to begin and has already taken her shoes off. Sunspear loves a festival, she said. It will love this. Let us wrap our knives in oranges. Let us invite this boy to our tables and see whether he bleeds. Let us make the Reach watch their vines while the Stormlands drink. My lady, Barristan said, what will you do when you meet him? If he is who he says he is. If he has that face. If he plays that harp. Daenerys thought of a girl who had never seen a harp and did not care. She thought of a city where men who played harps had died just like men who sold fish, and of how in the end every man died the way he had lived, with his lungs emptying. She thought of a child with a broken face who had tried not to let women see her look behind their eyes for pity and had failed and would have to fail less tomorrow. I will count his breaths with him, she said, and her voice was soft and terrible. And then I will decide how many more he gets. They moved slowly then, not because time had come to a stop, but because to move quickly is to break the surface of the water and make waves that drown you later. Doran sent ravens that were written to be read aloud in rooms where men listened because they wanted to learn what to tell their wives later. He sent one raven that was written to be burned because the man who would read it needed to put the knowledge in his mouth like a bitter herb and swallow it where no one else could see. Arianne sent silk scarves and baskets of fruit and girls with bright teeth and boys with bright eyes to houses that needed to be reminded that Sunspear did not only make war with steel. Areo walked at night through the Shadow City like a man who has decided to be the kind of shadow that other shadows know by the sound it makes when it moves. Quentyn went to the practice yard and let a captain from Lemonwood teach him again how to put his feet in order. He did not overreach. He did not throw his weight wrong. He did not try to be the man he was not. He worked until the sweat ran dark on his back, and he could feel the way a sword's weight becomes a promise if you hold it long enough. He did not ask for approval he had not yet earned. He did not ask for the gift of being Rhaegar's ghost. At night he lay awake and counted the sounds that made Dorne. Wind in palms, water. Someone somewhere singing a song whose words were so old they had gone to seed and spread themselves over the whole place so that no one could say where they came from. He turned on his side and put his arm over Daenerys and did not ask whether this was enough to make a king. She lay awake beside him and counted the rooms she would need to enter before she could sleep in one where the doors did not talk all night about all the men who had gone through them and died. She thought of a boy with a name that had been dead longer than he had been alive. She thought of a chair made of swords and what a silly thing it was when men who sat in chairs like that feared everything soft. She thought of a lemon tree, and for once, for the first time since she had realized the lemon tree and the red door were perhaps both lies, she did not feel the cold emptiness that followed the thought. There was a lemon tree a day's walk from where she lay that would not belong to her, and that was all right. She could eat the fruit. In the morning, a messenger came from Starfall with words that took the faces off two men in the room where they were read and left them with expressions so bare it was almost indecent to look at them. Gerald Dane had been seen, and not seen again, and the thing he had taken with him when he ran had not been a jewel. It was a way to make a hole in a room. Doran closed his eyes and let his breath go and let the pain have him for one entire count of 10. When he opened them, he said, "Find the place where he will stand next and be there before him." Obara came home with blood under her nails and kissed Daenerys' hand too hard and said, "Forgive me. I break things I mean to greet." Tyene wrote to say she was in the green country and the ladies there were as poisonous as oranges left too long on the branch. Nymeria sent a message with a folded scrap of silk and a line of words that said nothing and everything. "I have learned how men carry secrets in their clothing. I will undress the city and bring you what you want." Missandei found a place for herself among girls who had not been told they were not allowed to speak. She learned the words for every kind of water in Dorne because each child had used different names and the names had mattered as much as the water did. She spoke slowly with women who could read the wind on a child's skin and knew when a fever was getting ready to come. She wrote letters for men who had never used a quill and made them sound like themselves, not like the men who had written over their lives for centuries. She missed her brother, and she did not let it spoil the taste of dates in her mouth. Barristan Selmy walked the water gardens like a man who had come to a church and found it was built to house children instead of gods, and that suited him better. He taught a boy the way to hold a practice blade so it did not wear his wrist out before his soul. He watched Daenerys sit with Doran and not be hurried and thought, again perhaps. At dusk he took his sword from its scabbard and oiled it and spoke to it like an old friend. Not because he thought steel could listen but because speech is the thing men have to turn fear into meaning. On the 7th day in Sunspear someone put a black banner on the windward wall above the harbor, and the city understood before the messenger made it through the gate panting. The Tyrells had moved 3,000 men into the Marcher fortress called Nightsong and set up their banners where they could be counted. The Lannisters had sent a letter that was a smile with no lips. The boy in the Stormlands had taken another castellated stone and shown men that Sel's words are a joke until they are at your door. Doran turned Sunspear into a mouth that could speak in a dozen directions at once. He sent courtesies like arrows to the Reach, each wrapped in silk so they looked like gifts. He sent men to drink in taverns where the common speech went to sharpen itself and set their cups down so that the coins showed the sun and spear when they were lifted. He wrote to his sister's widower's kin and said the words no man had thought he would put in any raven. "We have a queen. She is here. She will not come past you. She will go around." Daenerys sat with mapmen and with women who could describe the way the ground tilted if you drove a wagon north of Ghost Hill. She marked the roads not with lines but with notes. Shade here, water here, thieves here who can be hired if given bread with salt and a kiss on the cheek. She remembered the lands she had ridden through as a girl with a man who called himself her brother and no one else would. She remembered how you can be a person and also a possession, and she thought how a country is a person too and has been that, and she would unteach it. Quentyn went with Areo into the Shadow City at night because a husband must learn the places his wife has been made queen of, and there is no queen of one kind of room only. They walked under strings of tiny bells that men had hung to keep luck from running out without sounding a note. They passed a woman grinding spices in a mortar the size of a child, and he smelled the hot sweetness that makes men think they are brave. They passed boys who came still at the sight of Ario's axe, and then moved again, relieved to find that this was the old man in the stories who had not yet turned into a story himself. "Do you fear me?" Ario asked Quentyn in a place where two alleys met and had not decided yet which would become a street. The big man's voice was careful. He asked questions rarely and expected them to be heavy. "I fear what you are for," Quentyn said. Ario nodded. "Good. Some men fear what I am, but they are boys still. I have been for 3 princes. Men forget the first 2. It is good to be for something. Remember that when you are called to be against." When the raven came that bore the boy's seal, the one calling himself Aegon, Daenerys had just come out of a pool where the shadow of a date palm had drawn its frond lines on her skin like a tattoo. Her hair hung heavy down her back. She took the parchment with water still making itself into drops at the end of her fingers. She did not sit. She broke the seal and read. It was a courteous letter. It was the letter of a man who believed he was who he said he was and had never been told not to be. It suggested a meeting in a place of his choosing, not hers, and then offered a place of her choosing if politeness demanded it. It named Elia. It named Rhaegar. It named the 7 and the mother and their mother and looked toward Dorne like a boy looks toward a place where he has been told tales were told of him before he was born. It did not mention dragons. It did not mention Lannisters. She read it again and then gave it to Quentyn. He read it slower and then gave it to Doran, who read it without letting his face take any more shape than it already had. He traced one line with his thumb, the one where the boy had marked his tide, what he had taken and what he called it, and made a small sound that could have been a stone settling in a river or a man deciding how much wine he could drink before it damaged his gout. "What does he want?" Arion asked. "What every boy wants who has been told he is a king," Doran said. "To be a man. He thinks the thing that makes him a man is a seat and a crown. He is wrong. That will be to our advantage if we are not stupid." Daenerys stood in sunlight and dripped and thought of how to answer a ghost. She thought of Viserys, who had died because a man had poured gold on his head and he had believed gold made a crown. She thought of a prince with dark eyes who had wanted songs to save men and had found they could not. She thought of a boy she did not know, and of Elia, and of how the dead deserve truth from us and how often we fail them and do not care. "I will meet him," she said, "not at his choosing. He will come to me. He will come to Sunspear, and he will walk under these oranges, and he will drink this water, and he will speak Eliah's name to the stones that remember it. And then I will see what he is made of." "Good," Doran said. It was a kind of relief to be given a decision by a person who had the right to make one. "I will tell him he may come. I will tell him how one walks here. I will tell him we have a queen. Send him a basket," Arion said, "wicked. Send him oranges that are not ripe, and dates that are, and let him see if he knows the difference." "Send him a basket," Daenerys said, "and a mirror. If he is wise, he will look at his face in it and learn something. If he is not, he will use it to check whether his hair lies properly, and I will learn something." They laughed then, because if you do not laugh when ravens bring you the next war, you will find you have forgotten the shape of your own mouth when the time comes to speak to it. The sound of it ran across the water and made the children look up and then return to their splashing, as if someone had shaken a curtain and then let it fall. Night came down on Sunspear like a veil that a gentlewoman shakes out and lays over her hair. The stars in this country are not like the stars in the east. They seemed closer here, as if the desert had raised itself up to meet them. Daenerys stood on a balcony high enough that the wind had learned how to be kind before it reached her. She looked at the sea and thought of all the things that might be coming across it now, to her, because of her, in spite of her. She felt Quentyn come up behind her, and she did not turn yet, because it is good sometimes to let a man arrive at a moment you have already found, and see what he does with it. "Tell me a story of when you were small," she said. He leaned his shoulder against the stone and considered. "Arion stole my sandals once," he said at last. "She did it because she knew I would not tell. She wanted to see how long I would wait before I grew angry enough to fight a girl. I waited all day. My feet burned. I pretended they did not. That was when I learned something about myself I have never been able to change. That you would rather burn than ask? That I would rather burn than make a thing worse by asking the wrong person at the wrong time. Someone else brought me sandals in the end. It was Ario. He told me to put them on, and then he told Ariane to bring mine back. He smiled, and it was small and not for any court. He did not tell my father. I do not know if that was mercy or wisdom. It was both. She breathed out. My brother never stole my sandals. He stole everything else. He called it making me a queen. He taught me that if you take enough from someone, they will praise you when you leave them the smallest thing. He is dead. I still find myself praising him in my sleep when I wake and find I have any fruit to eat at all. He did not say poor thing or brave girl. He touched her hair and let his hand fall. When we meet this boy, he said, I will stand where you put me. If you need me to be a husband, I will be that. If you need me to be nothing, I will be that too. Tell me before the hour if you can. I am slow at learning new dances. She reached for his hand then and brought it to her mouth and kissed the knuckles one by one like coins paid for a thing she valued. Do not be nothing, she said against his skin. There are enough shadows in this world. Be a thing. He nodded. It was a vow. It was better than the oath he had gone to Meereen to deliver because it was not inherited. It would be heavier to keep. When the breeze shifted, it brought a scent too faint for anyone but a woman who had slept beside dragons to stand up and feel in her bones. It was the smell of burnt bone and something older, something like a name said in a country where you had never been. It made the hairs lift along her arms. She did not speak. She went to the parapet and looked toward the sea as if looking might make the distance shorter. What? Quentyn asked. She shook her head, a small movement, the way a hunter in the brush says wait to the dog who has not yet learned the words. She waited for the smell to come again. It did not. Wind is a creature you cannot bully. It gives and takes as it chooses. She breathed out and then in and then out again and told herself this. You are not a girl. You are a woman. You are a queen. You are not alone. Your dragons are not children anymore. They will come when they are ready. You will not call them until you have a sky for them to come to. Behind her the city made its night noises. Love and anger and trade and a child crying to be let out of a dream that had gone bad and being told to hush by a voice that sounded exactly like the one that had told Daenerys to hush once upon a time in a room with a red door that perhaps had not been in Bravos at all. She smiled into the dark. Because there are lies mercy tells children, and there are lies you can keep if you decide they harm no one. In the morning, the letter went back to the boy who called himself Aegon, inviting him to Sunspear, offering him oranges and shade and water and the courtesy due to any prince whose mother's name was Elia. Told him there was a queen here. It did not tell him how careful her eyes were. It did not tell him how many rooms she had learned to make hers by force of patience, and how many men had underestimated what patience makes in a human body. It wrapped knives in fruit and sent them on their way. Men at Planky Town mended sails and sharpened poles and told each other that the sea had brought them a storm that would drown men far inland who had never bought a fish. Women at God's Grace put new rushes down and made roasted onions and taught their children which rooms they were to go to if someone's banners came up the river, and they were not the ones their fathers pretended to favor. The wind blown came like the smell of rain, and the tattered prince smiled teeth and promised things he did not care whether he kept. A ship from Volantis brought a red priest whose voice could make men forget Heather they should be ashamed of what they have done. And he stood under the shadow of the Tower of the Sun and spoke of light walking in skin. And men who had never listened to any priest listened to him and then drank because they were unsettled. In Meereen, a man with a shaved head and a mask that made his voice sound like pain performed justice on men who had never thought to be just. The Unsullied stood and did not flinch, and the city learned to hold itself like a wound that heals badly and then one day is simply a scar. A brown river carried rumors downstream as if rumor were silt and made banks with it. On the 5th night after the letter had flown, Daenerys woke with her heart in her throat. Not because she had dreamed a thing that frightened her, but because she had dreamed nothing at all. Sleep like that is a portent as much as any vision of fire. She went out to the balcony with her feet quiet on tile that had taught itself how not to wake sleepers, and the wind met her and took her hair in its hands and laid it behind her as a mother might do. The stars were blunt as nails. Something moved in the dark, far out over the water. She felt it before she saw it. A heaviness on the air, a silence under the silence. Could have been a cloud, could have been a storm-stiff bird. It was a piece of night that had remembered it could be more than night. When it came closer, the sea under it rippled like a skin shivering under a cold hand. "Quentyn," she said, not loudly. He was on his feet before the syllables were finished. He came behind her and did not ask what he should bring. He put his hand on her shoulder and on the stone and made himself a bridge between what was coming and what was here. It passed above the outer wall first, a shadow on shadow, so that men who looked up saw only a place where no star lived and then could not say later what it had been. When it came over the tower, Daenerys could see the line of the long neck, the slow rowing beat of wings that had learned how to be tired. It circled once, twice, unhurried, deciding. It turned its head toward her and opened its mouth, and the fire that came was not the harsh spitting heat of a smith's forge or the lame anger of a man who has been contradicted. It was a flower opening and a mountain giving birth and a word spoken in a language you have in your bones but have never learned to read. Drogon. He had come without calling. He had come because somewhere in the Queen's chest a thing had beaten in a way that made the air move all the way over the winter countries and back. He came down like a decision. He lit on the edge of the parapet as if the tower had been made to take his weight. He folded his wings with the arrogance of a creature whose body knows it is an answer. He smelled of sand and blood and sky. The city had woken. Cries went up, of terror and of joy and of the old pain that remembers when the last dragons went away and what men did to fill the place they had left with stories. Areo stood in the stair and did not climb and did not descend, because the hour was not his. Doran in his chair let his head fall back and let something leak out of him so slowly that only the stone under his fingers could feel it. Arianne began to laugh and put her hand over her mouth then and did not stop, because it had been a long time since anything had been beautiful enough to be frightening in a way that did not dishonor anyone. Daenerys went forward and put her hand between two scales that overlapped like armor beneath fresh snow. The heat of him came up into her arm as if her blood had been waiting to be reminded what work it was meant to do. He rumbled a sound that shook the stone and the breath in Quentyn's chest. He lowered his head, and she put her forehead against the ridge above his eye as she had done in a country that did not know it was large enough to lose a woman in. She whispered a word in a language that had not been spoken in this country in 150 years and found it answered. Quentyn stood very still. His face was full of a light that had not been in it since he had been a small boy and had believed that camels did not spit at boys who were patient with them. He thought of a door in a pit he had not opened, of a flame he had not been burned by because he had not earned it yet, and he thought, there are other ways to keep promises. He thought, I will not be a man measured by a dragon's obedience. I will be a man measured by whether I know when to bow to what is needed. Drogon lifted his head then and looked over the city as if taking the census of his hunger. He exhaled, and smoke came out like a sigh. He turned and looked to see. He made a sound that was almost a question. Another? Daenerys said softly, and Drogon cocked his head, amused to hear his own thoughts made less interesting by a human mouth. He made the sound again. It was not a word, but men will make words where none are meant for them, and some who heard it told themselves they had heard the name of another dragon who was not here yet. Let him go, Quentyn said, and she nodded because she had not been holding him. Drogon spread his wings, and the wind they made rocked a man on the parapet who had thought himself stout. He leapt into the dark. He passed over the city, and the city laid itself down before him like a pet dog. He passed over the sea, and the sea showed his shadow to itself and tried on his shape and failed and did not mind. He went where he pleased, and night folded around the place where he had been like a memory resigned to being only a memory. Daenerys put both hands on the stone and felt it cool under her palms. She did not turn for a long time. When she did, she put her head against Quentyn's chest and listened to his heart as if it might tell her what beats made up the sound of the future. He put his arms around her and held her as if he had legs enough to carry both of them as far as they would go. Far across the water, in a fortress in the Stormlands that had learned how to be austere in a way that makes men honest, a boy who had been taught to think of himself as a sword stood at a window and dreamed of oranges without knowing their name. He dreamed of a woman with hair like winter light and eyes like a deep well, and of a dragon making a circle over a desert city he had never seen. He woke with his mouth full of the taste of something he could not name, and the taste was hope and fear married and not yet learned how to live together. In Sunspear, men went back to their beds and women to theirs, and some to the beds of one another, and the children slept the sleep of those who understand that a day has happened and that is enough. The lemon trees put out a breath that smelled like a kind of future. Water ran where it had been told to go for 1,000 years. The tower stood. The sea washed its lip against a country that had remembered how to be a harbor and was learning again how to be a keel. In the morning, the sky was so clear you could have seen the line between one kind of blue and another if you had had eyes that could see what gods see. Daenerys put on a gown the color of smoke and bound her hair up and walked into a hall where men had come to ask for one of two things: permission or war. She gave them neither. She gave them time and told them what it would cost. And then she went out into the light and stood on a balcony where the wind had learned her name. "Unbowed," Arianne said beside her, with a smile that could cut fruit. "Unbent, unbroken." "Yes," Daenerys said, and below them the city began its day, and above them the sky prepared itself to watch two dragons come into it where once there had been none. And somewhere out in the Stormlands a boy put on a sword belt and practiced saying his own name as if it were a thing he might be asked to give up. And in a room where water sang in stone and an old man's feet ached, Doran Martell picked up a letter and began to write in his careful hand. "My prince, my lord, my friend, be patient. It is a weapon sharper than any you have yet learned to hold.